Welcome to the latest iteration in the Build Beyond series. These are the series where we explore the latest, greatest things happening in the world of payments. Specifically today, looking at what merchants can be doing in these challenging times to get the most out of their payments infrastructure and architecture. These sessions will last for approximately 30 minutes, and there will be plenty of time for Q&A at the end, so please do save your questions until then. At that point, feel free to either write them in the chat that you can see, or raise your hand and we'll pick you out at random, I think, to ask those questions. I have the pleasure to have Steve Klebe, who's head of business development from Google Pay, join me today. Good morning, Steve.
Hi, Bradley. Great to be here.
It's great to have you. So Steve has really been at the forefront of the payment sector since before payments was recognized as a sector. So Steve, in your own words, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're thinking about these days?
Sure. Thanks, Bradley. So real quickly, Steve Klebe, I work on the Google Pay business development team. I've been at Google for 9 years, been in electronic payments for a very long time, roughly 40 years. I was the 35th employee at Verifone, and I was there for 9 years. So got my fill of the physical point of sale. As I tell friends, I left the hardware business with dignity 25 years ago. Then I shifted over to the e-commerce world and went to a company called CyberCash, the very first internet payment gateway, and then pivoted to CyberSource, where I spent 9 years as well. And obviously, I enjoy being in this realm. Here at Google, I'm responsible overall for all of our partnerships with all the companies like Checkout.com that service merchants and provide their payments, capabilities.
Great. Obviously, payments has changed a lot over the years. I guess what advice would you have in these current days for young businesses going through their payments life cycle, that journey? What are some of the challenges they're going to face, and what are some of the things they can do to, I guess, help evolve through these?
So the answer to that, Bradley, is very market specific and sort of segment specific. That's always part of the challenge with payments is people are looking for black and white, all-encompassing answers, and there are few and far between. So if you're a restaurant, obviously the pandemic, has hit hard, and for those restaurants who had already, embraced ordering, mobile ordering. They were ahead of the game. Others had to scramble, to catch up. So I'd say knowing that the world will continue to change, dynamically, kind of making sure that the various systems that you are dependent on are flexible enough to adapt and give you choices. And if I think back in my career, like most point of sale systems were fixed function, and like software had to be manually loaded into them, and now everything is over the cloud, which is a step in the right direction, but that doesn't, that's not the end be all, end all. The other thing, obviously, is relative to contactless. The COVID situation has created a step change and accelerated that realm. And I don't believe it's going to go back. I think it'll probably settle back a little bit, but I think we should now figure out how to embrace it and take it to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, it still baffles me that when I'm in the US, I'm still requested to sign for things at times. And of course, I mean, it's much easier and preferable for me to take my phone out and use something like Google Pay just to execute that transaction. So, I mean, this paradigm shift, I think we've been seeing, I mean, it's definitely been an acceleration. I suppose without saying too much about Google's own data, but I mean, how has this been? How have you seen organizations leveraging Google Pay to adapt specifically in relation to COVID?
Yeah. Obviously, specific data aside, but from a trend line perspective, like everybody else, saw the world fall off a cliff in March. But it was amazing, actually, the resilience, from April on. Not only did the stats recover, but the trend line, if I look organically, for the 12 months preceding, we were organically growing at a fairly solid clip. Then March hit, but then April came, and the slope actually went up exponentially, and the interest in second quarter, we had 15 new payment service providers come out of the woodwork, and need to feel the need to be enabled to support Google Pay like as quickly as they possibly could. And I didn't make a single outbound phone call. That all came in organically. So that was a pretty serious wake up call.
Yeah, they say necessity is the mother of invention. I think we're actually quite lucky. I'll say lucky is probably the wrong word to choose, but if this had have happened 10 years ago, the world was in a significantly different place, everything from video conferencing and of course payments itself. During that time, fintech became kind of a sub-vertical, a sub-sector, and now really a very fully fledged recognized sector in its own right. We hear a lot of talk around how merchants can think more like fintechs and how that can help them adapting to the changing landscape. Do you think that that's realistic? Do you think that the mom and pop retailers and maybe even the bigger ones can act more like a fintech and derive more value and provide their customers with better servicing?
Well, I think that they have to embrace the the overarching changes that are being brought about by the fintech community, and I do think historically, I don't think merchants gave it much of a second thought. Like they would just stroll down to the local bank branch, down the corner, and say, I need to accept credit cards, and basically take whatever, the local bank, gave them. And I think, most should now realize, if they didn't already, that they actually need to do some more investigation. They need to make sure that they're picking vendors who have solutions that are based on modern, software, capabilities that are flexible, changeable, allow them to not just take a one-size-fits-all solution and take advantage of things like machine learning and artificial intelligence to test what might work for them. Because again, if you're a clothing retail store versus a restaurant, versus a gym, your needs for payment capabilities are quite diverse. And so I do think that's how I would characterize what it means. You can't just take the first thing that comes your way. You actually need to do a serious evaluation on what the options are, and make sure that those options have built-in flexibility.
Yeah. I see a little bit of a freeze there. Still with me, Steve? Yep. Okay. Sorry. I just saw a bit of a freeze there. Again, one of the new normals we have to deal with nowadays around videos. So looking at kind of some of the blockers, I think it's often quite hard to know where to start. As in, when you are looking for improvements, or potentially you have just been using an old point of sale system in a gym or a retailer, how do you go about actually thinking about what you should be doing to improve your business? How do you identify the potential blockers that are stopping you enabling the customer journeys and the experience that you want to have or need to have nowadays?
Yeah, so again, I think it would vary by the segment that you're in. I think it takes a little bit of elbow grease. There is plenty that is written, out there about, the trends. And again, if you're a pizza restaurant, like I get it, like your main focus is making sure that, you're focused on, getting the best ingredients for your pizza and making sure your pizza oven is working. But it needs to be pretty obvious at this point that if your customers need to be able to order ahead, pick up side, like your payment systems need to be able to, deal with those things. The other, one of the other obvious things, very much facing the restaurant business, which, by the way, is a sweet spot for Google Pay. It's probably our #1 segment, is the food ordering space. I'm sure we've all walked into, any number of restaurants these days, and you see across the counter like 6 tablets, from all the different, food ordering systems. Well, you can live with that, or, there are solutions out there that, either bring all that data into your point of sale system, or at least consolidate all of those orders into a single tablet. So, you really have to be, looking out there, doing some research, and being willing to make an investment. The classic, think about how hard it is. You got a new frontline clerk that's starting this afternoon. You've got 7 tablets, sprayed across the top of the counter. How much is that going to cost you in not only training, but that customers are not going to get what they want when they want it, as conveniently as they want it. And unfortunately, that could end up like the customer might not come back. So the lifetime value, and of course that's where Google Pay fits in. People are ordering online and they have to go through a convoluted, order flow versus pressing one button and completing the transaction. It's a shame you might have lost that one order because they got, disrupted, but really what you've lost is the potential for a lifetime customer. And so these decisions, it's probably as important as the pizza sauce that you've decided to make for today.
It's funny you bring that up. There was a couple of restaurants I was debating trying similar cuisine, and both been recommended by friends. I decided to actually call them both up directly, and one of them directed me off to one of the food delivery apps. And I said, okay, fine. And the other one said, yeah, sorry, we don't have card processing. You have to pay by cash. And I said, well, at this point, I'm probably not going to do that. So it literally directed me to the other one. And then I was told 2 months later, you made the wrong choice. I said, well, sorry, loyalty now. I've got my favorite dishes. I know what I'm ordering. They're all saved. And if I want it, I just click my favorite order. I know it's going to be delivered straight away. I think that's an interesting point as well, that when people used to drop food off at the door, it's quite nice to hand over a couple of bucks to say thanks. But of course, nowadays, not easy to do that. So to have the instrument stored in the digital environment, of course, is firstly easier, but also now safer as well. Because Google Pay, again, having used it a fair few times, but ultimately you can link quite a lot through that now as well. So it's not just about kind of necessarily just the payment card and it just being a nicer user experience. What else is Google Pay coming up with in the future? Any sneak peeks you can give us into what to expect in the next 6 months or so? Or 6 years?
Well, for sure in the next 6 months. So you can actually look to what we're already live with. The next generation of Google Pay is actually live now in India and in Singapore. We just launched in Singapore, and you might guess, where it's coming next. But basically, yes, Google Pay had already evolved to more than just payment. It was already a place where you could store and actually sign up for loyalty programs, like with partners like California Pizza Kitchen and Walgreens, etc. You could literally sign up for the loyalty program right from within the Google Pay app. And then, of course, we, like the other pay, have a place to put your boarding passes for those of us, when we used to fly, and hopefully when we'll fly again. but even more is coming. So we're live today. So I can just simply talk about what's already live in Singapore and India. In India, we're doing there's a new trend that's happening in developing markets called open banking. So we're fully supporting and embracing open banking in India. So this is not on the card rails. This is basically direct interface to the banks where the country has mandated open banking APIs. But then in addition to that, we've created a social experience embedded as part of the payment app. The payment app up till now has simply been a utility that you rarely, if ever, actually directly went to. But that's all changing now, and Google is just one of many that are doing that. People are familiar with things like WeChat Pay and Alipay, where the payment is part of an experience. It's not just an after the fact thing that happens at the very end of a transaction. So we now have a concept that we call spots. So every time I would send you money through the Google Pay app, a P2P transaction, your face is actually going to show up as a little spot, in my Google Pay app. And then the next time I want to pay you money, instead of searching for you, I'll just be able to press on that spot. The same thing on the merchant side. If I go buy, something from Panera or, Starbucks or whatever, a little spot representing that merchant is now going to show up on the home screen, of the Google Pay app. As most humans are creatures of habit, and we tend to go back to a subset of merchants, over and over and over again. The idea is now you'll actually say, like, rather than just typing in a random URL or doing a search, you can simply say, oh, I have already ordered pizza from that restaurant last week. I want to order it again. I'll just open up my phone, open up the Google Pay app, click on XYZ pizza. And it'll take me right back into that experience. And then we're also including loyalty and offers, much more rich experience around loyalty and offers into this next generation. So stay tuned.
I watched my partner update her 187 apps on her phone the other day and thought a lot of these probably could be unified, but it seems like this is certainly a vehicle that could help bring it all together and make it a bit of an easier user experience. I also had a sneak peek of this when I was last in Singapore, so I feel like I'm ahead of the times. It was very impressive to look at. But credit where it's due, of course. I mean, WeChat did a lot of things quite ahead of the curve at the time. But there was a huge element of I think social which came into it as well. So not only I have my favorite restaurants and I have my payment preferences and I have my loyalty schemes and combining those, but equally, how do I share those with friends as well? I mean, it's not solely related, of course, to Google here. There are various means by which merchants can reach their customers now, and their customers can reach each other. But how's Google thinking about that?
Well, it's top of mind, actually. And so we believe there's an opportunity. And at the end of the day, I often get the question, like, why is Google even in payments? And of course, Google at the end of the day is all about commerce. And anything we can do to help the end user have a more seamless experience and help merchants be more successful clearly comes back to benefit Google. It creates this virtuous circle. So the social aspect, people, there is a change that we're trying to drive towards, which is always difficult. People get very set in their ways when it comes to how they go about their lives, how they choose which restaurant to go to, which retailer to order their clothes from, etc. But the idea is that, we believe by concentrating that, within the Google Pay app, it's gonna really make for a much more seamless journey, for the consumer, which should benefit all of the participants, in the equation. Again, more to come on that shortly.
Can you tell us where we can see this next, or is that privileged information for now?
Just stay tuned.
Keep your Google News alerts on. Okay.
Yeah.
So obviously, I mean, there's levels of maturity and understanding around payments. I mean, no disrespect to any merchant who's still trying to find their way there. It can be a very, very opaque industry. You see it from the outside. If you ask the layman on the street, and I've ruined a Christmas dinner trying to explain it with salt and pepper shakers before, but when you click buy, when you click on order, when you click anything, not many people understand what happens thereafter, where their transaction goes, and how magically their bank is talking to this website they're on for the first time, potentially. Not necessarily looking at that value chain specifically, but what advice could you give to merchants in terms of leveling up their payments expertise? What would be some of the easier wins, some of the easier takeaways, so that they can get higher acceptance rates, happier customers, so that people who want to buy their products or services are able to?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because I would say I've created a lot of bewildered looks in people's eyes as well when people ask, like, "Oh, Steve, what do you do?" I say I work in the payments business, and people say, "What's the payments business?" And usually the example I give is, like when you pull up to the gas station, and they ask you to put your card in the pump, and like less than 3 seconds later, the pump, turns on. Well, I just explained real quickly that, like, from the pump, it went to a company, like Checkout, and then from Checkout, it went to Visa. From Visa, it went to your individual, issuing bank, all the way back, and the pump turned on. And I said that all happened in, a couple of seconds at most. And that's the payment industry. It's putting all of that, together. So I would say maybe it's a little bit back to my earlier comment, which is I don't think anyone can any longer, just sort of take this for granted. I think they need to understand that it's important to, be selective in your choices of suppliers, and don't take the first thing that comes your way. Do some investigation, do some reading, because those choices that you make early on in your journey as a business, even if you think you're only going to be like this one little store on Main Street and that's your aspiration, that's great. I admire that. That's wonderful. But if you do end up growing and have all of a sudden you have multiple locations, all of a sudden you need to add e-commerce. Well, if you've chosen suppliers that don't really have solutions, that can allow you to grow, that can allow you to seamlessly incorporate, e-commerce, into the equation, and especially if you're a small business, like, you don't want to have to be like managing your receivables, coming in from 3 different systems, etc. So there's the good news is, because of the advances in technology and the like, there are like amazing, choices out there for businesses to help them run their businesses much more efficiently. And payment, is a critical, leg on that stool. It's
Or I've lost everyone, one of the two. Sorry, Steve.
I can see you.
Okay, sorry, that may have been me.
Yep.
I missed the last 5 seconds there. I apologize for that. I think that may have been on my end.
Well, Bradley, I think I may have told you before, you need to get yourself a Nest mesh Wi-Fi router.
I could literally power my entire home by Google. By the way, my home is basically Google powered, so but I do like the efficiency. Before I get home, I can do pretty much everything. The point you were picking on there, but let's say you're a mid market and you use the anecdote of going from one to multiple stores. Um, let's go bigger. When you go international, I always think, the mantra of international business, go global, think local. I think it always, and selfishly, as also living and breathing payments for the last decade plus, I always think it relates to payments more than any other sector I've seen. But what's your experience of that what should you consider, especially maybe from a US perspective where it's quite a card-centric market when you first start looking into other markets to explore? What are some of the, I guess, the key takeaways or key checkpoints you should be going through to make sure that you're setting yourself up correctly?
Yeah, I mean, that over my multiple decades of being in the payments business, I would say that is like the single, one of the single biggest things that my screensaver just popped in. So that has been one of the single biggest things that I've observed merchants struggle with. Is when they start, if you're an e-commerce business and all of a sudden like you start getting orders from overseas, or if you're a physical retailer and you decide like things have been going well in the US and now usually like the next logical thing is I'm going to go to Canada, and the markets in Canada and the US, just to use a close to home example, really couldn't be any like more different. Both are relatively card centric markets, but in Canada the culture is around debit, whereas the culture in the US, while it has skewed to almost 50-50 lately, and during the last financial crisis, it definitely the tide shifted to debit, but now it has shifted back to credit again. But in Canada, it is very much a debit market. They also have a proprietary system called Interac. And if you're a merchant and you go to open up your business either online or offline in Canada and you can't accept an Interac card, you're hosed. And so the same thing that has been a wake-up call for most businesses that have ever looked to do business, well, especially in Asia. Asia's like multiple step changes away. Europe,
East.
you would think, huh?
The Wild East.
The Wild East, right. Europe is also, though, not quite as dramatic of a distance, from the U.S. But in Germany, for example, cards are almost non-existent. They are growing with younger people, currently, but really in the main, they're still, pretty obscure. And so there's a concept in a country like Germany called push payments, where and I remember vividly, like as Amazon was growing and expanded into that market, they had to completely adjust their entire checkout flow, their entire fulfillment process, to adapt, because the way it works in Germany is somebody shops at your site, they fill their basket, they decide to check out, but they don't enter the payment information. They get payment information from the merchant, and then literally the consumer like goes and logs into their banks. Now they log into their bank website. 15, 20 years ago, they would take this little piece of paper and they'd walk down to the local branch and they'd hand it to the teller and say, push, $400, to this merchant. Now at least it's online, whereas we're all used to, like, the moment you click OK, like you get an immediate confirmation that like the shipment is on its way, etc. Well, that's not quite the way you want it to work if you haven't been paid yet, right? Or you don't have the hope that you're going to pay. The other thing, of course, is the moment you cross border, you have to be much more concerned about fraud, being an issue, because it's tough enough to just fight a chargeback for fraud domestically, but fighting a chargeback for fraud that's cross-border. So again, I keep coming back to, like, you need to make sure you're choosing, suppliers who, have the capabilities to support you with things that you couldn't expect any one merchant, especially a medium, even to a large size merchant, until you're one of the mega merchants. You can't really, have the resources to build that stuff on your own. So you really need to depend on, suppliers to have those tools, available to you.
Yeah, it's definitely a mindset change I think you have to have when you're used to doing something and being very successful a certain way, and then you move somewhere else, and well, literally, it's almost like a different payments language that's being spoken. I'm conscious of time and wanting to make sure that people have the opportunity to ask questions. So feel free to raise your hand. I believe we can easily see that. Or by all means, write into the Q&A panel that exists there as well. And we'll happily go through them. You'll also see I just launched a poll, potentially belatedly, and maybe I should have done this at the beginning. But if you'd like to fill that in as well, it could also give us some potentially other talking points. But it's always interesting for us to see exactly what people are thinking about when they look at payments, especially in these current times. So while we wait for that to go through and any questions come up, I'll ask you it's either a softball or the hardest question, I'm not sure, but what do payments look like at the end of 2021 in a year's time? How have things changed, if at all?
Well, payments have already changed. I think that the COVID situation has already created, a step change, and I think that once the pandemic is over, double fingers crossed that it's sooner than later. I don't think we're going all the way back. I think that there has been we've probably advanced 5 to 10 years, especially here in the US market, which was lagging, very far behind the rest of the world when it came to adopting, contactless and what people are talking about is touchless, payments. So I think it was a wake-up call. So it was an enlightenment for consumers, and it was a wake-up call to businesses that they have to really pay more attention to this. I wish I could say that like things were going to get simpler in the next several years, but I would say that honestly, that's probably not going to be the case. We still have an extraordinarily fragmented market, and I don't think that's going to change. And I think the options, with all these brilliant minds now focused on solving these problems, that's a two-edged sword. And so there's going to be lots of stuff popping up, and for both merchants to try and consumers to try. There's still the debate about should it be NFC for contactless, or should it be like 3D barcodes. So recently several major players have announced 3D barcodes. We had somebody come and provide a service to us recently, and literally I paid him via Venmo, and I had never paid him with Venmo before, and he just opened up his Venmo app, and he showed me the barcode. I opened up my Venmo app, put it over his, read the barcode, and like I didn't have to search for him, at all. It just happened. I think the variety of choices is going to continue to grow. So I think there'll be an ebb and the flow over the next 3 to 5 years. And some of these things are going to come and go and not stick. And others are going to, stick, and merchants are going to have to be prepared, to embrace them. Because at the end of the day, you want to have the choices that your customers want to use, which, there's supermarkets still take checks, right?
Yep.
These things, these things never go away. I just think it's going to get, more, for me personally, at this point in my career, this is all entertainment. I understand that for businesses, like, these are serious challenges to try to keep up, with the this evolution that is happening. But I know one last point I guess I would make is, pre-pandemic, as somebody who works on a product like Google Pay, it was always very frustrating to me when I would walk into a retail store and I would say, like, I want to pay with Google Pay, and they would look at me like I had just landed from Mars, and they would say, "Oh no, we don't have that," and I'd say, "Yes, you do," and just type in the dollar amount on the terminal. They type in the dollar amount in the terminal, and I just waved my phone over the terminal, and magically, it worked. And, like, they would look at me like I had just, literally, come down from the sky. I would say that in 6 months, that has completely, changed. So, that's from our vantage point, that's very, very, promising, because that opens up doors now to doing a lot of more enhanced things, and we're no longer having to worry about just simply educating people, about contactless. So anyway, I'll put it back to you.
No, I think that adoption takes a while until suddenly it doesn't, and it's everywhere. It's that exponential curve that exists. It's also around innovation as well. Like, by nature, it is going to be iterative. I think Henry Ford quote comes to mind. If I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they'd have said they wanted a faster horse. So sometimes I think you have to try things and then see what the reaction is from the market. I think a lot of the installment products that are out there now, and I'm sure this is something which is on Google's radar too as a possibility. Obviously, they're popular with certain industries, so it seems like there's potentially legs on that. But of course, you go back, maybe not 5 years, it's a bit unfair to some of the guys out there, but go back 10 years, I don't think really any of them existed in any meaningful way. So again, that's a different model of extending credit to your customers that really probably could have been enabled, but maybe needed the technology to actually catch up with it as well. But it's still nice to see that in the payment space. It's been around for a long time, but it feels like innovation is increasing, if anything. So we had a few people. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I see we have a question in the Q&A box.
Yeah, likewise. So well, I'll read it out loud so that everyone can benefit of it. It's quite a pointed question. So, as online payments emerged around you, do you have any clear winners in the worst payment flow and best payment flow categories? So if you really want to name and shame a merchant here, you can go for it. Maybe one who's no longer around. But does anything stand out potentially as an experience that you or you saw others go through, or you thought, oh my word, why on earth are they making their customers do that? Or you thought, wow, that's the first time I've seen this. These guys are thought leaders and bringing new things to the market. Other than what Google's doing, of course.
Yeah, well, I guess I would use a couple of examples. I would, without naming any particular merchant, I would say that one of the worst things I see happen out there is what I call the NASCAR wall of buttons. And so I think that's a huge mistake. There needs to be some intelligence that's implemented. It's not rocket science. And we always, for merchants that are enabling Google Pay, I say very clearly, like, if you just throw the Google Pay button into a wall of buttons, like, we're not going to help you. But if you take advantage, we have an API call where, the moment the consumer shifts to the checkout process, you can do a call behind the scenes to see whether the consumer is logged into their Google account, and if they have a card associated with that account, you should bring the Google Pay button forward. Because again, if all you do is just generically throw up a wall of buttons, that's not going to help any. So I would say that that's kind of word to the wise. As far as specific examples, I'll point to some amazing, examples. Two that come to mind is, Starbucks is like, has been sort of on the, the wall of fame when it comes to, they got out ahead of the curve, with their mobile payment, stored value, mobile payment option, and complete hats off to them. I also, of course, was happy over time where they opened that up, and like they're now one of our biggest partners, with Google Pay on their Android, native app. But I think the message that others have to realize is not everyone is Starbucks. So what happened was, and this is the classic herd, not herd immunity, but herd mentality. And this is one of the biggest challenges, that just because something works for merchant X doesn't mean it's going to work for merchant Y. So everybody felt like they needed to have a solution just like Starbucks. Well, sorry to make this point, but not everybody is Starbucks. Not everybody is visited 3 to 7 times a week by their customers. And of course, the vendor community saw what was happening with Starbucks, and basically went out and tried to pitch merchants that you need to do this too. And so people need to really stop and think, does that really fit my my particular product, my particular customer relationship situation, etc. The other one, of course, which has been highly pointed out and not talked about quite as much right now because of the pandemic, but the whole concept of having the payment experience disappear, and some people have called that the Uberization of payments. And so I think most people would say that one of the most profound positives about Lyft and Uber was the fact that not only could you order a ride up front and have it come right to where you were standing, but when you got out at the other end, you literally could just step out of the car and you were on your way. And so that became known as the Uberization of payments. But again, that's great. There are clearly use cases, where that is a perfect fit, but it's not perfect for every situation. So you really need to make sure that what you're looking at applies to your particular circumstance.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny, when someone is a pioneer in that space, it creates a lot of innovation around it as well, and you see mobility take off using that same model. And on the Starbucks piece, I think your point around the habitual nature of loyalty is really key. Then it becomes literally habit forming. But yes, obviously not everyone's Starbucks. So if you don't have a one on every corner, it's going to be hard to build that habit up. Another question just came through, I saw, says, really enjoying this conversation. Great. I'll put that down to Steve. What advice would you give to someone launching their first web shop? What are the foundational payments do's and don'ts?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have observed ever since e-commerce happened 25-ish years ago. I was fortunate enough to be around. Worked for a company that was the very first internet payment gateway. I think of it as a carousel of choices that businesses have to make. And depending on where you step onto the carousel, it's your spectrum of choices, will change, and sometimes unbeknownst to you, those spectrum of changes, the spectrum of choices, will either expand or be limited. So I would say that you want to make sure that now, again, this is going to depend on if you're someone who's going to sign up or buy an off-the-shelf e-commerce platform, or whether you're like going to hire some web developers to build like a complete standalone, like a single product kind of web business. So a lot of my answers, unfortunately, are not simple answers because it really varies depending on the type of business you're about to build. But I would say that you want to choose a probably the most important choice you make. I wish I could tell you it's the most important choice you would make is about the payment options that are available to you, but I would say it's in the top 3 or 5 things you should be looking for. But probably first and foremost, you want to make sure that the platform itself has the necessary tools that you need to surface your merchandise, to do inventory, feed your financial systems, etc. Get the information to whoever your fulfillment houses are, and oftentimes those are the things that drive businesses to choose a particular platform. And again, think about that carousel. Like, you're going to be getting your merchandise from like a given supplier. So you talk to the supplier and say, like, which e-commerce platforms do you already have an integration with? And they'll say, well, we work with BigCommerce, Magento, and Shopify, right? So right there, like, all of a sudden, unless you want to pay that partner, $500,000 to build out a new interface to some other, supplier in that, for that critical piece of your business, you're pretty much now, you're going to have to then go look at between those 3 top e-commerce platforms, which ones now have the best A, B, and C, and one of those things has to be, what are the payment options that are available, from that vendor. I personally believe you should hopefully find a vendor that gives you flexibility in terms of they may have a baked-in solution, and that's okay. That might be adequate for you, but you should, in my opinion, choose a vendor that, in addition to whatever baked-in solution they have, they also give you the option to pick your own payment service, provider. That would probably be, my top level 60,000 foot, response without knowing specifically what business, you're asking about.
Yeah, and I think that's a key point at the end there. There is no silver bullet in payments, depending on the markets you're in, depending on your business model, the customer demographic you're looking to address. There's always going to be slight deviations of what the best advice would be. I think we have time for just one more question that maybe links slightly into actually what we were discussing already. How do you choose the right alternative payment to integrate and/or feature for your business requirements? Do you want to have a quick go at that one?
Sure. I guess I would say that if it's likely that your use case is going to be very mobile centric, and it's hard. There aren't that many businesses today that are still like desktop oriented. If we're staying in the online context, there aren't many businesses that are like primarily desktop experiences anymore. So you really, we all know that the entire world is moving to mobile, and so I would first and foremost make sure that any platform you choose, allows you at minimum, to support Apple Pay, Google Pay, and probably PayPal. Like those are sort of the 3, linchpins. Excuse me?
So I'm going to say table stakes at this point. You just have to have them.
Those are that's exactly the word, Bradley. They are completely, table stakes. Now again, though, you need to apply some intelligence. If a customer, you should know what your demographic is, and if your customers are, likely to be Android users or iPhone users. Clearly you want to make sure that you support, both of those, but you have to support them intelligently. You can't just, again, throw them up on the wall in every time someone goes and clicks on the checkout button, because they won't always, make sense. Again, there's those three are kind of like table stakes at this point, and then beyond that, I would say it's very specific to your particular geographic, demographic, environment that you should then make further choices. If you're in the gaming segment, there are a bunch of prepaid things that service youth that might not have a credit card or a debit card available to them, where they can go to 7-Eleven and buy a prepaid card and then they can still play your game. So it's essential, if you're in the online gaming business, that you support some of those kinds of choices. So again, it's no one size fits all answer.
Know your customer, know what they want to pay with, and let that feed back into some of what you should do.
Exactly.
So I have many more questions of my own I would like to ask, and I'm sure there are others as well from the audience that we're not going to have a chance to get to, but unfortunately we're not only out of time, we're over time. So I'm going to have to call it here for today and say, Steve, thank you so much for joining. It's always interesting to hear you talk. I love it when you share your wisdom, and hopefully we can do this again very soon. For those people listening in, we will be following up with a recording of this session, so don't worry if you arrived late or, like me, you had a momentary glitch in the matrix and lost your connection, then you can come back and listen to it all again. And we will be sending some follow-up notes as well. So stay tuned for the next session, the next Build Beyond, and thank you all for joining today.
Thanks you, Bradley, and thank you to the team as well. Great job.